Welcome to the AI Applied Podcast. I'm your host, Connor Grennan.
And I'm your host, Jaden Schaefer. Every week, we break down the latest in AI news, tools, interviews, and discuss how to apply AI into your career and life.
OpenAI thinks that superhuman AI is coming, and so it's actually starting to build some tools to kind of mitigate that risk and help it, not overtake humanity. Connor, you've probably seen the headlines on this. What are your thoughts on what's happening there?
Yeah, TechCrunch had a great article on this, which came out, I guess, December 14. OpenAI thinks superhuman AI is coming and wants to build tools to control it. Okay, a little clickbaity. I mean, superhuman, blah, blah, blah. But, Jaden, aren't you at least a little relieved that we're having this conversation in sort of a more calm manner? Like when OpenAI was blowing up, everything was like, even I was having this conversation, with some good friends of mine around like, well, but it was good that they did this, or it was bad that they did this. Like people were starting to have really hot takes around this. And it started to kind of like put people in two camps, right? About whether like, is this good for humanity or bad for humanity, and what's safety and all that kind of stuff. So even as we're sort of going into this and the most recent news, I just want to kind of like take us back a step and just remember with OpenAI, with the board and everything else, the board was kind of constructed essentially in such a way that there was, I think like 9 people on it, and 4 were sort of like super safety people. That was like the, Helen Toner and people like that. Mm-hmm. And then 5 were more like, I don't want to call them capitalists, but you know what I mean? Like more like that. And then 3 of those sort of like, yeah, right. 3 of those sort of like, more economically minded folks dropped off. And they never replaced them. So all of a sudden, it was like a Supreme Court if like 3 liberals dropped off and all of a sudden the right had control, right? It's sort of like, you can argue whatever you want, but in either case, it's not really kind of quote unquote fair. And there's an imbalance. And that's how that got kicked off. But it turned that whole conversation into like, this is right and this is wrong. When in fact, this is a really interesting conversation. And Suskever seems to still be leading this. The thing that keeps striking me is that OpenAI, and this TechCrunch article is fantastic, I think, on this. But it did reconfirm something. And Jaden, you and I were talking off air about this. Like, I keep thinking that I dreamed this. I'm glad to see it back in print. That OpenAI actually takes 20% of its, whatever you call it, its compute, its GPUs, whatever, and puts it toward the alignment issue. And I don't think that gets nearly enough play, because I can't even think of another company that does kind of the equivalent of that. So anyway, I guess just to kick us off, I'm just grateful that we're having this conversation in sort of like a more rational rather than sensational way,
Yeah, no, 100%. And so I think this is a big conversation that needs to be had. For like, some people are like, oh, we'll never reach AGI. Well, like, look at the progress, look at the speed that everything's happening. Like, obviously these AI systems will get indefinitely better forever. That's how technology works. So at some point, they're going to be better than us at everything. And like, what does that look like? What does that mean? What can they do? Let's talk about it, right? So I think removing the people from the conversation, they're like, it'll never happen. Like, it'll eventually happen. Obviously, everything eventually happens. And then, like, how do we mitigate that? So this is the solution that OpenAI has proposed. This is essentially like their thing. They came up with this, and they have a simple diagram that they shared. And I'll just tell you what's on it so you get like a visual of this. But they have 3 pictures. One of them, they title it traditional machine learning. So it's there's a human, and it's supervising a robot, and it's like this little tiny robot. So it's like, the picture they're painting here is that the human is obviously, bigger, superior, and the robot is small. And this is kind of traditionally what we have, maybe what you would call ChatGPT today. They said what super alignment looks like and what we're worried about in the future is how do we deal with the situation when they have this little diagram where it's like the human, and then there's like this giant like Terminator robot. And it's like, how do we deal with this situation in the future where these AIs are much better than us? And so their solution to all of this, in their 3rd diagram, I'm happy y'all get to listen to me explain these diagrams, but they have a picture of a small robot teaching a bigger robot that's just like that's like ChatGPT today. So it's not the Terminator one yet. But essentially what they're saying is if they can get an AI model, a less sophisticated AI model, to guide, control, and pretty much guide like a better AI model, if they can get that ratio to work, then they're saying we can get the ratio to work where a human is guiding a superhuman, the super Terminator robot or whatever. So I think this is a good conversation. I think this is a good like way to look at it. And like, listen, they said like openly in all their stuff, they're like, hey, this is like our approach. This is what we're thinking. If anyone has better ideas, like, please give us better ideas, to the point where, they're putting grants, they're putting money into this space. They're putting their money where their mouth is on this. But I think overall, the solution that they've come up with is AI is going to be better or more intelligent than us at some point. So we need to get like less intelligent AI models to be able to guide more intelligent AI models, so that that same ratio happens in the future with
Yeah.
humans.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a great, hey, you described the diagram pretty well, Jaden. You have a future in whatever that business is. But like,
Diagram description.
but that's right, because that's the way to think about it. Because the thing that nobody, well, you said sort of some people might disagree, but I don't think so. I think everybody can sort of see this coming, right? And then how do you sort of see it, right? And the people that now there's like, Jeffrey Hinton and place people like that who are like, and I'm putting aside like some of the, people like Gary Marcus and people like that who are like really like this is just bad news for everything, and more
Mhm.
like the people who created this and who are like, hey, I helped create this, and Ilya Sutskever at OpenAI was a disciple of him, right? Like, and they're saying like, look, there really is an existential threat here, and I tend to take their word for it when they say it. It's like
Mhm.
if you're watching, your basketball team playing, you're like, oh, how could the coach ball? Like the coach probably knows something that you don't know, right? So when people are saying that, especially these kinds of people, I do take it very, very seriously that this is the case, and I take it seriously, sort of like how they're approaching it and all that kind of stuff. Same with the whole creation of Anthropic and Daria Amade, kind of leaving OpenAI to create this, and they have their own board similar to OpenAI's board, which is, look, if things start to go wrong, we're going to give you all the power to just like fire our whole board or 3 out of the 5 members of our board. So that's what's that interesting part to me, is really like, we know that this is a thing, and then what's going to happen. And this is where then I go back to Mark Andreessen's like Techno Manifesto. Do you remember this thing back in like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
October, where he's like, what are you guys talking about? I mean, like, this is like, we're going to be in control. Like, we're the humans. This is not a science fiction movie. This is not going to rise up like the Terminator. This is already under our control. So I guess sort of like these two kind of points of view just seem absolutely wild to me, because I understand it's difficult to predict the future. The
Mhm.
fact that it's so difficult to predict like what's going to happen, and the fact that they're kind of like putting these guardrails in place, where like a kind of like Anthropic is doing, right? They have like a constitutional framework where it's not just humans, where it's like, this is teaching this. I love that approach. I'm just like, I believe me, I love the clickbait headlines around AGI and everything else. I'm just not
Mhm.
sure how to even think about it, because people say like, well, what should we do about this? And my take, Jaden, and I want to hear your take on this too. I'm like, is this one of these things where we just have to leave it to the experts? Because I don't know what you can do about it otherwise,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, Here's the thing. I do think this is an important conversation to have. People can weigh in. I mean, at the end of the day, we have the power. I mean, what power do we have really? That OpenAI is going to do whatever they want, and they'll spin it however it is best for humanity because of X, Y, and Z reasons. Because really, they're building the system, and the government will regulate it to a degree, but I was also going to be listening to OpenAI. So, I mean, take it with a grain of salt. I think it's an important conversation to have. I think it's important for people to talk about. Here's the one thing that I think no one is talking about, that I feel like a broken record on. Like, literally, I do not hear this conversation anywhere, and I feel like it's very obvious. And that is, we have this like AGI coming, whatever, right? We have the super intelligent AI coming. People can argue what level that's going to be, but it's not just going to, like, people are like, well, what's it going to do? It's like a computer. You like unplug it, right? Okay, it's not just going to be a computer. Like, look at what Tesla is doing with their freaking Optimus
Right.
robot that came out this week. And I know everyone's like, oh, whatever, right? Like, hype about it or whatever. Okay, there's literal humanoid robots that are going to have AI embedded into them. They're going to run around town and find an outlet to plug themselves into and live like with their own in-house model. So like,
Yeah.
whether you like it or not, like, this is going to exist. Someone's going to make an open source, a jailbroken Tesla Terminator bot, and it's going to be crazy, right? So, and I know it like sounds crazy, but that's actually not crazy. Like, that
No,
literally will happen, and that's a
yeah.
future just prepare for, or think about, or regulate, or do whatever the heck people want to do. But like, that is going to exist. If there are robots and there is super intelligent AI, those things will get merged together, offline, jailbroken, hacked, however, and people will make them do bad things. So, I mean,
Yeah,
there's that. But then
so
maybe
I
there's gonna be
agree.
lots of good ones that will be the police that run around and stop the bad ones. Like, whatever happens, I think it's important to have this conversation because it's
No, I totally agree. This is why I sort of like was dying to talk about this on this podcast too, just because I want people to go in with understanding what the two sides are. It's just so easy to read one article and be like, oh, well, killer robots are going to, kill us all, or to read, the Mark Andreessen thing and be like, oh, turns out we're fine. And I just want, this is sort of AI applied, right? So one of the reasons that we started this podcast, Jaden, as you remember, is so people can have this kind of conversation and not just like take the one thing they hear and how do you apply it to your own, your work and your professional life and all that kind of stuff. And I think in this case, it's really, really important to know that yes, the future is very murky, but the idea, especially with like the new OpenAI models and Mistral and everything else, like there's not even that much jailbreaking to be done. Do you know what I mean? Like these are open source models where people can use them as they will, and they will use them as they will. They will use them sort of like whatever they want. And then what sort of regulations do we have in place? And I think this will go to, how is OpenAI treating this? How is Anthropic treating this? How are these giant companies treating it? Because ultimately, even with jailbreaks and even with, the killer robots, if we can count on, because I don't know that we can count on I like our government and all that kind of stuff, but like, I don't think we can count on the government for this. Like we need to know that OpenAI, let's call it Google, Anthropic, Microsoft, Meta, that those folks are all aligned in a room saying like, we have a plan, Jaden. And do you feel like they have a plan? Because this is the kind of conversation that's going to be happening in the proverbial water coolers around our country.
100%. I think that them talking about this is putting their money where their mouth is. They're showing they're serious about it. They're coming up with solutions. Is this going to be the eternal solution that's always going to have super alignment figured out for AI? Maybe not. But I think the fact that they have some of the smartest people, they're dedicating a budget to it, they're working on it, and they're taking it seriously. To me, that's all I need, because at the end of the day, like you mentioned, a lot of people might want to be like, the government should regulate it, like the government should save us. But like, we have to remember the government might be good at some things, but when it comes to tech, it just reminds me of like the TikTok hearings when I don't remember who it was, but one of the senators was like, so is TikTok listening to me through my Wi-Fi? And it's just like these people don't always know what's going on in tech, especially when it starts getting to be really sophisticated stuff. They don't know what's going on. So
it's a generous way to say it, Jaden. Yes, very well said.
So like really at the end of the day, like I want to see these conversations happening at OpenAI more than I want to see the EU AI Regulation Act or whatever that can be outdated or could just be like completely irrelevant, dependent. Also, like I think, side note on the AI Regulation Act that I think is funny is that Mistral AI, great company, open source, cool, big fan, whatever. But they were able to lobby and get like a bunch of carve outs specifically for open source models because they're like in Europe and whatever, they're buddies and they painted it as good. Okay, but the point of the story is like they used lobbyists and got the act to be like in their favor. So it's not like, the government's this like unbiased group that's like, regardless of what anyone says, this is what's true and good and here it is. It's like, but if there's any lobbyists, we'll make some like little things. So it's just like the government's not it. I think this is the companies need to be really focusing on doing this internal regulation. And I think to this point, they've been doing a good job. They've been showing they're taking it serious. And so that gives me a lot of optimism.
No, I agree. And just the last thing on that too is that like you talk about Mistral, but that's open source and then sort of open weight or whatever you want to call it too. But then you have like Meta, right? Meta's also like open source. Like it's not like open source or like the small Linux, the small guys versus the big guys. Open source is either. So again, this is one on an OpenAI AI Applied podcast. This is where you want to have these conversations. Like, don't take anybody's word when they say, oh, well, open source is going to be the most dangerous. Open source also may be the safest. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's no way of knowing when you have like humanity kind of like diving into this. There's good and there's bad, but like, I'm with you. I want to sort of like put this in the hands of Google, Meta, OpenAI, Anthropic, all those guys, because the government is probably not going to solve this for us.
Yeah, and I think the open source is the solution that, let's say, like there's a bad apple in the Google Meta, someone wants to take all the power and be the all-controlling AI, like, okay, we have open source. People can use it, and this is a project that a lot of people are contributing to, a lot of the top minds are working on. So that all brings me a lot of hope, but it's going to be very interesting. This is an exciting topic. OpenAI obviously thinks that this is coming down the pipe. So it's going to be interesting to follow along and see how this plays out in the future. To everyone that's listening, thanks so much for tuning into the AI Applied podcast. Make sure to rate us wherever you get your podcasts. We super appreciate it, and I hope that you all have a fantastic rest of your day.